Hey, beautiful souls. I'm so excited for season 2 of About Her that we're just starting. And as my first guest, I have the wonderful Nora with me. Nora, thank you so much for joining. I am very excited to speak to you today. And as always, I would love to give you some space to introduce yourself in whatever feels best for you right now so that people can get a little bit about you, a little feeling about you before we jump into our conversation.
Thank you so much, Anna. Such a pleasure and joy to be here. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the conversation with you today. So to introduce myself, it's interesting. It's always a little bit the question, right? Do you tell a story of where you came from and how it all came about, or do you focus succinctly on where you are today? So I think if I would just say where I'm at today and what I do now, how I define myself is as a systems change advocate. And then, of course, the immediate follow-up question of many people is, what is systems change? What does that mean? What does that entail? So maybe that's something we'll have an opportunity to dive into it further in the conversation. And I'm also a social entrepreneur and an artist. And I speak very openly about mental health, burnout, and the importance of doing what I call the inner work. So some people may call this, personal development work or caring for your own mental health. It can take many forms, but for me, it also includes deconditioning ourselves from some of the narratives and stories that we inherited, whether those are personal limiting beliefs that just stand in our own way of becoming who we're meant to be, or more systemic, large scale ones, right? For example, how we are conditioned if we are gendered female at birth. So, what we are taught is to be a good girl and how you're supposed to behave and how you're supposed to show up. That can be one thing, but equally, we are also, steeped in narratives about being separate from nature, for example, for many of us, that it's okay to extract from and destroy nature, and so on and so forth, right? So there are many stories that it kind of falls on us to decondition ourselves from, and also have the privilege to rewrite into more beautiful stories, stories that ring truly true to who we are. So that's what I would say about who I am today. So I work on change. I work for a more just and regenerative future. And I have been since I was about 15, 16 years old. So I've been on a trajectory of trying to find my own way of making the best possible contribution that I can to this future that I just know in my bones is possible. So that's maybe something about me. Ever since I was a child, I just never accepted the status quo without blinking, right? I just always questioned, always thought, oh, but there could be more. And why are we doing this way? And couldn't we do it differently? And just having that curiosity, that kind of instinct to step up and speak out and seek ways in which we can improve and together shape a more inspiring path forward.
I love that very much. Thank you for sharing. And let's see, there are many questions that came to me. What I feel is very, very much there at the moment is like the zooming out. We talked a little bit about that before we hit record. And I think you showed it very beautiful in your introduction, is that there's like the individual work, the inner work on yourself to see like, who am I? What am I here for? What do I want to do? What calls me? And then there is the bigger picture of how we are conditioned, how we treat nature, how we treat each other, how we treat ourselves, of course. So it's kind of like, of course, a loop that we're in. And I strongly think that the microcosm is much more potent than we ever thought. At the moment that you'd really treat yourself with the most respect, you naturally treat others with the most respect, and you naturally treat nature with the most respect. So it's not that anything is separate. And I think what often is missed in classical education or upbringing, it doesn't even have to be like inside an educational context, is the connection of everything and the way we find ourselves through to where we actually are. Like you said, it's some go through a mental health challenge and then kind of figure out what they're about and what they want to do, and some do it in other ways. But I think it's very necessary to go into what you call it, like not accepting what is, but actually always striving for something better without neglecting what is good. And I think that's kind of a balance. I would love to ask you how you navigated that from so early on, this like balance between like, okay, I see there's things going quote unquote wrong in the world. There's things that I don't want to accept, and I can see like where we could go potentially. and treating yourself well during the way, or finding your way to say like, okay, I cannot do everything. It's not possible. And me alone, I'm maybe not able to change. But like, it's a dance to not overexhaust yourself, stay true to yourself, but still don't give up because it's just a too big project.
I really like the word dance to describe this. Like what I put together a couple of years ago is a model, I call it the transformation loop of inner and outer work. And it really looks like this infinity loop. And to me, it just expresses that indeed the inner work always informs and drives and nurtures and kind of, also limits at times the outer work that we are able to do. And then hopefully, as we have done some more outer work, that in turn inspires us, right? And informs us, or maybe challenged us in a certain way that we can go back and do more inner work. So I think in our society, we are often extremely focused on the outer work. We're extremely focused on what have you done? What have you achieved? Certificates and awards and prestige and milestones, right? Whatever that looks like. But we tend to be very, very focused on that. And I think that is part of the reason why we have struggled to address the challenges that we're facing and that we actually created ourselves as humanity, right? So, for example, climate change, many people are like, oh, we just need the next tech innovation and we just need this new app and we just need this new, right? And we've been hearing this for what, 20, 30, 40 years, right? And at some point, I think it's really important to acknowledge like that just the next technological innovation is not going to be enough. Like clearly there is something else that is broken here that is not working. And to be able to pause and actually face reality the way that it is. And for example, that our system is broken, that extractive capitalism that is completely unbridled cannot be sustained on a finite planet, right? And maybe a few people will take a spaceship and colonize Mars. Good for them. Probably the same people who had the biggest hand in destroying the planet. But for most of us, it means complete destruction of ourselves, right? It's really a form of collective suicide in a way. Kind of to face that and to acknowledge that can be incredibly difficult, right? But it requires us to pause. It requires us to sit with the uncomfortable truth, with the difficult thing that we are witnessing and that we are asked to hold. And then indeed reflect what are the things that I need to work on within myself. And then by extension, in my community, in my family, maybe in my team or my organization, what needs to change within us so that we can show up differently in the outer world. So, indeed, as you were saying, I don't think that we can bring certain things to the world if we have not done the work within, right? So, an example I often give is if I'm convinced that I want the end of the patriarchy and I want all people to be free and I want women to have less restrictions and to be able to show up as their real selves and glow and shine and, right, really bring all that they have to give to the table. How can I contribute to that if I still have internalized that I should be a good girl, that I should not speak up in meetings, that I should be quiet, right? And kind of please everyone. So there's something there where we need to, as I said before, decondition ourselves, or we need to rewrite certain patterns or narratives within ourselves to be able to show up for that future that we want, for that vision that we want. And that is both very, very powerful and also incredibly hard to do. And what I see in some, movements, it's a bit like a pendulum, right? So our society was so much on the outer work that now there's like a swing to the inner work, and then it almost goes to this like navel gazing point where it's all about becoming the best self I can be and protecting my mental health and kind of embodying the light and whatever, type of language you want to use, where at some point it can become incredibly self-focused and disconnected in a different way again from reality, right? And from that I am a participant in a community, in a society, in a world, right? I am interconnected with other people. And you cannot just mindset hack or manifest structural inequity away, right? Like there are material facts about how our society is structured. And sure, there are psychological, insights and certain mindset things that are proven to potentially help how you look at things and therefore how you act. But the material conditions into which you are born, that's just the cards that we are dealt. And sometimes kind of to gloss over that and pretend as if there are not certain people who have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. And even that barely, right? and all of the other forms in which there's inequality and injustice in our world, I think also does ourselves individually and collectively a disservice. So to me, at the end of the day, it's about finding a way to kind of, as you said, dance, right, between this inner world and outer world, and doing the work that is required on both sides. And if we have a natural tendency, or right now we're more in one than the other, see if we can balance that, bring it to an equilibrium. And that is something that I think all of us have to do. And I definitely had a long journey of being very focused on what I wanted to change in the world, right? What I wanted to bring, what I wanted to create, and indeed neglected my inner work in that context. And specifically for me, it was an energy of self sacrifice, an energy of overgiving, of putting my own needs last, and eventually burning out, right? Because of this. And it's really interesting and humbling to acknowledge that even though I knew on a rational level, right, this was my work. Like I was talking about this inner work, outer work, of not fighting the symptoms, of root causes, of, right, like changing things really at the level of at which they need to be changed. And still I was doing this in my own life, right? So rationally, I knew like self exploitation and self sacrifice could not lead to a more just and regenerative future, right? It makes sense. Like, if I don't embody regeneration, I cannot really contribute to the best of my ability to a more regenerative future. I knew this rationally, but the pattern of self sacrifice and of overworking was so deeply ingrained that it took years, and really going through a burnout and chronic depression and many health struggles related to that, to really come to terms with this and be able to face it. And even then, it's not over, right? So maybe also to say that I never want to speak from a place of like, as if I, was enlightened and I had to figure it all out. On the contrary, I'm a humble learner. I'm on this journey, same as everyone else. And I think this is a challenge that I will meet in my life time and time again. And it is something where I need to remain vigilant, right? Like every day, every week, every quarter, every season, I need to check in with myself. How is my balance with work and self care? Have I fallen off, off course? Have I veered off course with what I set out to do to take better care of myself? Do I need to pick it back up again? And that's just the way it is. It's just what my inner work entails. Apparently, it's what I signed up for in this lifetime.
Yes, yes. It's a very multi-layered process. I love the pendulum explanation. I use that very often too. And I think to some extent it is natural for all of us to go through that with whatever theme we're currently working with. But it's often like the total self-sacrifice and then going into the total opposite of like only quote unquote caring for the selves. And even there, I think there are many, many layers. So there are shades of the pendulum, but then there are these layers of like, how do I care for myself, or how do I care for the world? And again, the microcosm, macrocosm thing, that's something that I love observing. And sometimes I need to really breathe through, because it's not making any sense for me whatsoever to say like, I'm just doing the bubble bath and then I care for myself, or I'm just taking the electrical car and then like everything's fine. So there are so many more layers to all of these things, inner work, outer work, that we can look at. And what I really feel is that often it is so overwhelming. And most of us have been conditioned in a way to say like, that's the one truth. Find your one truth. Maybe by now we all kind of have gotten the idea of there are multiple truths for multiple people, but it's still like, I need to believe that, but this means I cannot believe that. What helped me a lot is when I've discovered ancient wisdom to say like, I can hold both. And it's actually my job to hold both. So I need to maybe figure out how to actually fits best into my world, but I actually can care for myself, do the inner work, and do the outer work at the same time. It doesn't have to be the either or that we might have experienced in our earlier teens, 20s, however long. But there is kind of the sweet spot in the middle where I can take time for myself, but then I'm able to pour from not an empty cup, but like from fullness, from abundance. And therefore I can give more to the world, and I have maybe more energy to actually think about like, what action would be the more sustainable or the more healthy for the community, for the planet. So there is definitely a balance, a dance that we can talk about. And I feel it's necessary that we explore both sides a bit to then come to the sweet spot. And as you said, it's not like, oh, I found it and then I'm staying there forever. I would have loved to have that. But it looks like no, it's a constant. It's a constant unlearning on a different level. And I think what I would love to like go a bit deeper about is the people pleasing and this like over sacrificing for whatever. Might be like environmental issues, might be the job that you're in, whatever field, might be your family. It actually doesn't matter, I think, but this like conditioning of, especially as females, we have to overgive before we actually can take time for ourselves. We have to always be there for someone else. I definitely raise my hand on that a lot, and it led me to burnout together with, I always was like very active trying to protect the environment, and to an extent that was not healthy. And that led to burnout. And it was so hard, still is, to like find my way back into, I can care for myself and I don't have to feel bad. Even if that means at some point I might disappoint someone, I'm not a bad person for doing that. And even if that means that at one point I need to do an action that I know isn't 100% in integrity with how I think we as humans should treat the earth, for example, a flight, then I can consider doing it still and I'm not a bad person. Which on the other hand doesn't mean that I need to fly every day from there on. So like, where's the balance again? So that we're not spiraling from trying to save something or over sacrifice into the burnout. I think it's actually quite a delicate web that we're navigating, we're trying to navigate. And the more aware we are, and I think that is something that we experience collectively at the moment very much, is like this awakening phase. So becoming aware of everything that happens, and maybe even our contribution to that might be in a thought process contributing to the morphogenetic field of it or the actual action, but there's always a contribution that you give. And like, what is it? Can I live with that I've done something that now I wouldn't do again? Like, how do I mentally navigate it and not beat myself up, but still show up and say like, okay, well, maybe didn't do that perfectly. Inner work, outer work doesn't matter. But now I'm taking a next try, like really finding the motivation to then start again and say like, okay, from here on, I'm not beating up about the past, but from here on, let's try a different, maybe more balanced state. And that is something I would love to have a handbook on, because it is universal for every soul I've met. We had kind of this conversation. And so I know that you do a lot of like art work to balance out, and I would love to hear how you have navigated this and what you found for yourself is working well to kind of bring you back to this like, I am home, I am balanced state whenever there is a struggle.
I definitely think that perfectionism serves no one in this space, right? That when we try to be the perfect person, the perfect even environmentalist, that is such a dead end in a way. And the big risk that I see is that if we approach trying to do better, right? Trying to be on a journey and to learn more about issues and inequalities, or what harms the environment and what doesn't, and we try to adjust our habits slowly, that if there's this energy of like you have to be perfect at it, many people will never even start, right? And I see this in like sometimes when I notice like people that I admire or friends of mine who are really pioneers in something, they really are doing a great job. For example, a friend of mine, Amelie, she's co-creating a community that is living really in a way as sustainably as possible. They had a tiny house, one of the first ones in Switzerland, and now they're building this community. And when they got media coverage, you always had people in the comments saying things like, "Oh, but you have a dog. Like the dog eats meat, right?" So like just coming in and trying to point out you are failing at being perfect. And I would just always look at this and say, what if we spent that energy of criticizing other people for what they're doing or not doing, and instead focused on what can I do, right? Like Mr. in the comments. what are you doing? Like, what gives you from the sidelines the audacity and the authority to go and criticize someone who's really, really trying? And that is this Brené Brown thing, right? Of like, don't take feedback of people who are not in the arena. Because I think if another activist comes up to me and says, hey, Nora, I think, you said this expression. Did you know that it's really ableist, for example, right? It's really discriminatory because maybe this other activist is really expert in this field and I don't know, right? And I'm like, thank you so much for telling me. And it's an opportunity for learning and for growing. That is different from people who just have this like criticism energy, even though probably themselves they're doing nothing at all or barely anything. So that's just one important thing I think to say, that perfectionism cannot be the way we treat ourselves on this journey and can also not be the standard to which we hold each other. And the other important thing in this is that we're all on this journey and there are so many topics and there are so many problems, right? And the tech is problematic and people die to mine the minerals, and the clothes are problematic and destroy people's health, sometimes even kill people and pollute entire rivers. And our energy sources are problematic and, right? So the problems are incredibly vast. And in my field, we would say systemic, right? So they are not in the hands of a single individual to change from today to tomorrow, right? Like you and not I can decide tomorrow that we will live in a not capitalistic economy, or that suddenly it will be completely prohibited to harm people who, produce textiles, right? Like that's not within what we can decide. So the important question is, what is within my sphere of influence? What is within the scope of what I can decide? And I can, for example, decide to not do a shine haul on Instagram, right? I can decide to maybe stop buying clothes for a while because do I actually need more clothes at this point, really? Or to join a local, clothes sharing cooperative, or there's these startups where you can go and rent clothes, or to buy secondhand if I need something, or to only buy if I really, really need it, right? That is completely within my sphere of influence. And so there is something in this field where we talk about systems change, and it's really, really important to acknowledge that some people hold more power in the systems and therefore also more responsibility, right? Like it is specific people that we can name from Pepsi and Coca-Cola who came up with this idea of plastic and then invented recycling as a way to make us all feel better about just throwing stuff away all the time. Whereas before it was circular and it was glass based, right? And they did it entirely for their own bottom line. And we can name those people and we can hold them accountable, and we should, right? And that does not mean that I need to now buy, a water in a plastic bottle every single day. So both are true, right? So this is also goes to what you were saying. Like so often it looks like it's an either or. Oh, is the system broken and do we need to fix the system? Or do we need to encourage individuals and also encourage ourselves to do what we can where we're at? And it's both, right? Some people will go and work on systems change. That's who I support with Paraima, and that's amazing. And I cheer you on if that's you, but many people will not. And it is still, especially as privileged people who have disposable income, and the free time to think about all of those things, it is still within our prerogative and our freedom of action to make certain decisions. And for example, to carry a reusable bottle and just say no, thank you when someone offers me single use plastic. I can do that. And maybe I need to do an exception once I'm on a hike and there's no fountain, whatever, right? There's contexts where you can, of course, right? You need to adjust, and I can still try to do my best. And again, without this energy of perfectionism. And so that's really how I look at it. I look at it as a both and as an approach where each of us can look, what is it that I can do in my context? And some things will come easier to some people than others. For example, I never liked eating meat, let alone seafood. Like even as a child, like you could, if you would show me a fish that still looked like a fish, like I would never ever touch it. And so when I became a vegetarian around 16 years old, to the dismay of my entire family, that was super easy to me, like it took a bit of a transition time, but I never really missed it. Whereas for other people, it's like such a big part of a culture, what they really like, they may be connected to belonging and family, right? And there's so much more to it that makes giving up, for example, red meat, let's say, as the main culprit of emissions, very, very hard. And on the other hand, I had very low self-esteem and I had really, drank all the Kool-Aid of self-worth, and especially as women, and that, never good enough. And you always have to change more about yourself and shave more and do this more and buy this new dress. And maybe then you will be worthy, then you will be beautiful. And so for me, detoxing from retail shopping, luckily this was before online shopping was really a thing, but that was really hard. And for a while, I had to walk through cities, kind of like, like hiding, like really not really looking at all the shops, at the storefronts, because it would really drag me into this like, wow. So all that to say, like, we all have a different journey to walk, a different path to walk, and it's okay that we have to make trade-offs because we are in these broken systems. So, okay, we have a computer, right, that we know was not made in ethical ways because we are here to bring certain messages to the world, right? It's not that I just bought this computer for, I don't know, my personal entertainment, right? It's a tool to contribute. So it's a trade off I'm willing to make. And in a similar way, right? Okay, should I take this flight? It will allow me to go to a UN conference, whatever, to a gathering of like-minded people that will really support me in keeping my contribution or increasing my contribution, right? Like trade-offs can be found in different places and they will look different for everyone. So there again, a bit less judgment, a little bit more empathy, that we are all trying to navigate really broken systems and we don't all have the same means, possibilities, even levels of information. So it will look different and that's okay. And we can also help each other out, right? Like we sometimes again forget that we're a village, we're a movement. And we don't all need to have all the answers on everything. And it's okay that someone focuses a lot more on women's rights and I can learn from that person, and someone else focuses much more on climate change and mobility and I can learn from that person, and I focus more on something else and I can share that, right? And in this way, we can kind of inspire each other. So I think finding a place where, yeah, where there's more empathy, more gentleness toward ourselves while still holding ourselves accountable to what is within our power to do is a really important piece. And then to respond to your question around how I navigated this, because of course this was my Achilles heel, right? So in a way, all of that sense making and what I'm able to express, I hope fairly clearly by now, and transmit to other people is all based on really hard learned lessons, right? Because when I developed this philosophy of, well, just do your best, do what you can where you're at, and kind of maximize, right, what within your sphere of power or influence you can do, me taking things very literally and wanting to dedicate my entire life to this and probably being on the autism spectrum, I was like, okay, like my best, what is my best? Like my best is everything, right? Like when have I done my best? When have I given everything I could give in a single day? And when I'm completely exhausted, when I fall asleep at the desk, like is that when I've, deserved rest because I've done my best? So that's really something that in the burnout clinic I had to work with a lot, like to redefine what is actually my best. Like when has that point come? And for me it was a journey to learn, as I mentioned before, that I cannot self-exploit, self-sacrifice to pave the way for a more just and regenerative future, that this does just it just does not work. And I had to tie it in my mind to my impact. I had to understand that as long as I treat myself in this way, it will create tension and problems also in my work and in my organization. And it will limit what I'm able to bring into the world. And if I'm a public person and some people maybe see me as a role model in certain things, would I really want to transmit this to anyone? Like, would I wish what I'm imposing on myself on anybody? And I wouldn't, right? I wouldn't want that for anyone. So that's kind of how I, had to find my way around that, and really remind myself that taking care of this vessel, of this body, of its basic needs, and also on more the soul level, right? The kind of that mental health perhaps perspective is also part of my duties in a way, is part of what should be on my to-do list and part of what I need to prioritize. And it's hard sometimes, but for me, I really had to go through a long process of accepting this, coming to terms with it, and really understanding how otherwise it's a form of self-sabotage and it's standing in the way of what I feel I'm here to bring. But yeah, definitely a work in progress. And art has really helped. So yeah, we can absolutely talk about this more as well.
Yeah. Before we do, like what came to my mind was this self-exploitation. And I think it's particularly hard to let that go or to kind of even become aware of it because of the baseline of what is quote unquote normal in the society we live. Because everyone else is doing it and it's kind of expected from you, then it's very hard to even come to the point. It's like, maybe that's not what I should define as normal for me, or what I feel is beneficial to me, to like to become aware that this is unhealthy or not bringing me forward, or a form of self-sabotage for all of them in its own. I think it's a very, very, very important and not as obvious thing to do. Like you said, some of us like really need to work until exhaustion, until diagnosed burnout, or whatever disease or symptom your body produces, to say like, okay, stop, no more. From this on, we need to find another way. Sometimes we have to like really get it in our face ways and not in the gentle ways until we actually get the signs. And from there on, what I've experienced myself, or with all my clients as well, like the biggest pushback is often a society that kind of like condition us to these standards of self-sacrifice, of overworking. Like you said, me too, I had to have this talk with myself, just like, when it's enough. What is enough for you? Is it 15 posts a day? Is it 20 clients a day? Is it 15 hours of work or not? Where's like time equals value is something that was so deeply ingrained in myself. And this like, I have to give and do until I can't, like my body physically can't. And then like that might barely be enough. So like worthiness and the contribution, I think that's trap that we often fall for if we go into like bigger picture, or just quote unquote stay in the family area. It's often this like, you're only worthy if you do something for someone else. And I found it quite toxic until I realized that this belief was like so deeply ingrained. So I think like shouting out to each and every one who actually became aware that there is something that doesn't quite fit and tries to do their baby steps and finding another way, in slowing down and actually saying like, no more. I love myself enough to stop working after 6 hours, after even 4 hours, whatever, and like detaching really, or breaking up this paradigm of saying like, only if I work till exhaustion I can actually contribute, or I actually did enough. And there will always be another meeting, another conference that you could go to. So it's an endless thing that you kind of like work against. So as you said, like working to exhaustion, there's no point in doing that, because afterwards you couldn't do anything. And we logically all know that, but when did we stop? And that is something I think we need to like really bring more awareness to like release the judgment, not only about others, but also about how we behave ourselves and what we give ourselves, where our energy goes, where our focus goes, where our love goes too. And being much more gentle with ourselves, much more nice to ourselves, and actually like forming a belief system, therefore the inner work that you've mentioned, that says like, I'm worthy of my own love, respect, energy, attention, and maybe even money. I can pour into my own cup as well. And then yes, I can learn from others, but I can also like treat myself in a way that is not harming someone else, but that is actually like filling my cup. And that is where I would love to bring your art into the conversation.
Yeah, there is definitely, again, such a link between the systemic and the personal here, right? Like a lot of those things that we feel and we are told there are these personal struggles, right? Like we are told like women need to, go to therapy to decondition these things and, burn out and you couldn't cope with the pressure, or, oh, you're depressed because there are, like wars and genocides and ecosystem collapse. And like so we kind of pathologize the response to something that actually the response is completely logical, is completely normal. Like you can absolutely understand why someone in a system where you're constantly told you have to perform, your value is your output, your value is your job title, right? You have to produce, and everything is linear in the patriarchy, right? Like we don't live in cycles anymore like our ancestors used to, because that's just how all of nature functions. No, 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 right? Like we are told everything has to be linear and perform the same every day, no matter the season, no matter where you are in your cycle as a person who ovulates and menstruates, and so on and so forth. Like these are all really big, profound stories that were taught to us, since, Christianity in some cases, right? With the role of women in society, in other cases, since the Industrial Revolution. And there is, to me, again, it's so interesting that we are all of us who kind of become aware of this, like, oh wait, this actually doesn't work for me anymore, right? Like I have to learn to love myself. I have to learn to take care of myself. We get the impression that we are on this incredibly individual journey, like as if we are the first person to have this insight, when actually, right, we are millions of people going through this process. And sometimes we are maybe too shy to speak about it. We are embarrassed, right? Many people have a burnout, for example, and never even mention it. But just in general, to say that, yes, it's a very personal journey and it will have a little bit of different flavor depending on how this showed up in our own families or in our own subcultures of this big system. And it's a collective journey. It's a systemic journey of, like I said before, like realizing the narratives we were given and choosing to replace them with another script, with another story, one that is more true to life, more true to who we are, more true to our souls, and so on. And something that really helped me do that is to reconnect to the stories that we had before the Romans colonized where I live, which is Switzerland. And this part of kind of Central Europe, bits and pieces of France, but also Austria, southern Germany, is where the Celtic civilization is believed to have origined from, right? Is believed to have come from. And then, of course, today we associated it a lot with Ireland and Wales. And then further north you go, the harder for the Romans to reach. And even if you're an island, even harder to colonize and really eradicate the culture, right? So we were thoroughly colonized in Switzerland, and we have pretty much nothing left in mainstream culture of the Celtic wisdom and the Celtic way of looking at life. But luckily, it was preserved in other places. And so, instead of turning my gaze to the many other beautiful indigenous cultures that exist across the globe, I spent quite some years looking at, well, what is the indigenous culture here? Right? Like my ancestry, where does it lie? What is the lineage? What is the wisdom that I can build on? And for example, the Celts had a Celtic wheel, which speaks to the cyclical nature of life, like many, if not all, indigenous cultures out there, right? Because by definition, if they were a thriving indigenous culture, they were in touch with nature. They had to be, right? Because to not be aware of the cycles of nature meant death, meant not making it, right? And that was before this paradigm of man is here to dominate the rest of the creation, right? Man was made first. And like all of these stories that came later, before we saw ourselves as part of the ecosystems, as part of nature, and as living in these cycles. The solstices, the equinoxes, like all of these are points in the year that many, many civilizations across the globe marked and celebrated. And each season has a different quality and has a different purpose, right? Like you may work a lot to harvest in fall, right? And then you celebrate because the hard work in a way is done, and there's going to be nothing to harvest in December and January when the snow comes and, right, like the plants lose their leaves and so on. It's going to be more a time of introspection and rest and reflection and, living off of what you had produced the rest of the year. And then spring comes around and we plant new seeds and we take care of them and so on. And I've begun to not just try to live like this on a yearly basis as a cycle, but also see this in my own cycles. Like I see it in my, in the cycle that I go through if I menstruate and I let things go. And it's a time of more rest, right? And maybe pain in my case, maybe for others too, probably for others too, statistically, doing less and being more introspective and letting things go. It's like the internal winter in a way, right? And then from there, suddenly there's a burst of energy and new seeds are planted and I do things and then I take care of them and they grow and I celebrate. And then at some point it's time to let go again and reflect. And in a similar way, I've done this for years with the cycle of the moon, right? Always with the new moon intentions and the full moon reflections. So I think what really helps me is to remember that we are not alone in questioning these narratives, these pressures, right? And there are societal answers. For example, if we would accept that at some point the economy is going to collapse anyway, maybe sooner rather than later, so we do need to degrow, and it's going to happen either by design or by accident. And if you read some of the degrowth literature, it's actually very beautiful. It's like, well, if we all just worked 4 hours a day, there would still be plenty. There would still be more than enough, right? And we would still be able to meet all of our basic needs, and we would consume less. Okay, we would have a little bit less money to spend, but we wouldn't need to spend money on things we don't actually want or require because we are maybe happier, right? We are more balanced. We have more time in nature, more time with our families and loved ones and communities. And that is the true marker of a happy life, right? Or maybe I decide to work 10 hours a day in summer because I'm so energized. And then in winter, I take a complete break, right? So just this allowance of retuning in with what's actually humane, what is actually true to our species, even just on a biological level of how much sleep we need in different seasons, right? And realizing that there's work to be done on a systemic level, on a societal level, to shift the policies to reflect that more. And some of us have enough privilege, enough, stability or access to resources to be able to make small changes in our own lives, to design them more and more in accordance with that which is true, right? With the cyclical nature of everything, including ourselves. And so that's, for example, something that I've spent a lot of time doing. And I try to honor my own cycles. For example, I am really pretty useless before 10 a.m. That's just how it is. Like I'm just not a morning person. I'm more have a burst of energy in the evening. And I am more, productive at other times of the day. I also have a chronic tiredness that makes it hard to really, be the kind of person at 5 a.m. that would do sports and everything. So just to honor that. And so that's maybe also an invitation that even if societally it's frowned upon, or your friends or people around you might consider it a bit weird. Like, what are ways in which you can, craft little pockets of freedom or make little adjustments step by step in your own life so that it becomes more in harmony with who you actually are and what you actually need, what your body needs, what your soul needs.
That is very beautiful. And I think it's doing so many things at the same time, because it's like tuning in into the body as well as a slowing down and coming back to the rhythms of nature. And yes, there are still things to choose from. It's not to say that we need to then only focus on full moon and new moon and work. So no, it doesn't have to be like a strong concept. I think the awareness of the cyclical nature, and also this, like what you said about Petrarch and the linear like thinking, I think that is something that is really, really easy to understand that way, and to just become more aware in every day, like, where are we actually tuning in? Where are we actually like leaning into the way nature does things and learn from nature as it's supposed to be, in my opinion? And where aren't we? But then again, not judge, but just like maybe see, like, can I tweak a little? Maybe even not now, but in the future. So not adding pressure by this, I think, is very important, but still being aware and even becoming more aware and observing of where there are these little pieces, pockets of freedom, you said. I love that very much. That we can craft, that we can like maybe even expand to bigger things, and slowly they can take over into a different lifestyle. And I think that is something that is also often very hard for people, is what we've talked about like for the last 3/4 of an hour, is something that isn't an instant change, but society has for so long focused on instant gratification. And therefore it's like, okay, yes, of course I can not buy single-use plastic. Yes, of course I can cook fresh meals. But what's about the rest? Like, we don't see instant change by doing our new actions, by changing our paradigm. And I think it's important to address that. That doesn't mean that we're failing, and that is not meaning that it's useless that we do so, useless that we make an effort towards a better future just because we're not instantly seeing like everything looks better just now because I didn't buy food in plastic, So we need a lot of patience and believe things that are not that big in the society we live in. And still, these are the ones that are actually required as much as like the cyclical nature, as much as like the respect towards ourselves and others and the animal and plant kingdom, the universe itself. There are so many layers where we can become more humble, become more slow, become more in tune with what actually is needed instead of saying like, my self wants to manifest this whatever right now just for the benefit of me. So it's again, it's like the dance, and I think it's a big topic that we try to cover in such a short time. There would be so many more things to speak about, but just as an inspiration to see like where can you find that little habit that changes much more than you might actually think. Maybe it's just a little thing, like you say, honoring when you are actually at your best in the day or in the month, where you're actually feeling your best. That does so much. And then you have a lot of more energy and motivation and inspiration coming into to do things that are not only for your personal benefit, but for the bigger, for the collective. So it's always the reflection and then the action part. And that is actually quite beautiful. I think it's the same thing that you said with the seasons. Winter is a reflective time, and you might think like, okay, I tried to plan this, that worked, that didn't work, and then the next spring you adjust what you've learned over winter. So a society that tries to eliminate winter time, reflection time, isn't one that can actually learn. So I think each of us individually, if we consciously take that time to reflect, take that pause, that is contributing to society as well.
Yes. Absolutely. And it is slow going, right, in many cases. And I sometimes think like we are planting seeds of trees under whose shade we will not sit, right, as the proverb goes. So a lot of the things we are doing is also because we want to be good ancestors, right? We want to care for future generations as well as the current ones. And I think there is something really beautiful in this. For me, like people sometimes ask me, like, how do you keep going and stay motivated in the face of how big the challenges are and how little is changing? And it's almost like, yes, of course, I have my moments of despair and of pain and of heartbreak and of seeing something that's just, I'm like, how did we, you know, how is the bar so low? Like, how did we get here? Of course, I have those moments. But there is this model by Peter Senge, an MIT complexity scientist, that says that we are standing in the creative tension between present reality and the future potential. And so we are both connected to things, how they are today, and to how they could be. And daring to do that, to hold both as true and as possible and real and worthy of being connected to, means we will feel a tension. And sometimes that tension is heartbreak and disappointment and despair. But in any case, it's the only place where change really happens. Because if I'm only in the future potential, I'm, potentially delusional, disconnected from reality, in my own bubble, not able to bring anything to the ground. If I'm just in the present reality, I am probably depressed or cynical, or I feel like nothing will ever change. So I kind of see myself as this, feet on the ground, heads in the clouds, like making that bridge right between the two and standing firmly in that tension. That's something that really, really helps me. And the other thing is kind of to say that for me, just giving up was never really an option, because why would I want to live a life where I have internally checked out? Like I have internally just given up and disengaged. Like to me, that cannot by definition be a good life, because a good life is also a soulful life, is a true life, is a life I am proud of, a life that has meaning for me. And so it's almost like no matter whether what I do makes the difference that I exactly think it should or does, it is still worth doing all the same, right? Because that to me is part of what makes life a good life and a meaningful life. And it can be so disempowering, right? To think, "Oh, well, things are going to go wrong anyway, or a handful of very rich people are going to destroy us all anyway, or whatever the narrative is. And to find our way back to our own power which includes, like we were discussing, the way we look at things, the way we show up, the way we treat each other, the choices we make, the sphere of influence we have, and using that to make a difference, the changes we decide to dedicate potentially our lives or part of our lives to, the way we raise children if we have any, or children of the neighborhood or of our friends. All of that has so much power. And this is where art, not as an output, not as, the kind of art that you would do to put in a museum, but just art as an act of self-expression, the creative process, the process of creating something, whether that's a poem, randomly painting something, dancing, moving, working with clay, really not for the output, just for the process and what it does with me, brings me back to this clarity that I am a creator. Artist is like artist has so many connotations and expectations attached to it, right? But I am someone who has the power to create. Like I can take, even if I take mud, just earth from the floor, mix it a bit with water, I can create something out of that. That is a power that I was given. That is a power that I have. And sometimes art in its raw truth, in its expression, what it mirrors to us in that process of doing something cannot just teach us a lot of things, and new insights and new visions may come through, which is like an amazing side effect. But on a very baseline level, it just reminds us of our power. You are a creator. You are a creatrix, if you want. You are someone who can actually create. And that means that you can create change in your life if you want to change something in your life. That means that you can contribute to a better tomorrow if you want to do that. It means so many things, right? But just this remembering that we are not just victims of a bigger scheme. We are co-creators in how we experience it and in how the future looks. And for me, creative processes like what we do with the well just have such a key, such a power to bring us back to that embodied knowing that we are indeed creators.
Yeah. Which is the real empowerment that then can carry you forward. So that is really beautiful. I thank you so much for your time and for your wonderful, I'm not giving up energy. I think that is really such an important work to do and also to witness. So thank you for the inspiration. And that was really, really inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation, Anna. I'm looking forward to hear the ripple effects and the insights and the questions from everyone. You can always reach me via either LinkedIn or Instagram. Paraíba is a good place if you're, thinking about how to bring your contribution to the world, and maybe systems change as a term interests you. And the well is more the place, the sanctuary, the safe haven for this inner work, specifically through self-care and creative practices. But either way, you can find me online and reach me. And I'm always very grateful to hear what sparks something within the people that are listening and to really enter a conversation. So thanks again, Anna, for having me on your podcast.
So much. I will link everything below. So all the links to reach you, to explore more of your work will be in the caption, so that all of you who are listening can check that out and then get in contact and get more inspiration. And that's it for now. Thank you so much.